So if you'd like to help support us and get some awesome new clothes or other accessories with our new Parasaurolophus design on it, then head over to bit.ly/iknowdino store, or you could just go look at it if you don't have any intention of buying it and want to see what we've been talking about all these episodes. This week, we have a bunch of new news, including a new membrane-winged dinosaur, just like Ichiro, a bunch of other new finds, and some exhibits. We also have an interview with Brian Eng, who has made some of our favorite paleo art. And if you follow his Patreon, you know that as we speak, he's making videos using some puppets that he built by himself, which is pretty awesome. We talk about that a little bit. And we also have Dinosaur of the Day, Talururus, kind of a tongue twister.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get into all of that, we'd like to thank some of our patrons who help keep our podcast running. And we just had a couple new patrons join, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And we're really appreciative because really we don't have any sponsors right now.
It's very exciting.
Yeah, and the patronage is what's keeping us going. So.
High fives all around between the two of us, but still.
Yes. So this week we'd like to thank Kyle, Brendan Kavanaugh, the Tolbert family, Sean Tanagaki, Remy Rodriguez, Marcy, Rohan, Bradley, Bilal, Scully, Avery, Crispy, Joaquin, Jeb from Arkansas, Aiden James, Albertosaurus, and Alan.
Yeah, again, thank you so much. We really appreciate all your support, and we could not keep this podcast going without you. So if you want to join this awesome growing community, then check out our page, patreon.com/iknowdino.
And thanks to everyone who bought our merch too, because that also helps.
Oh, yeah.
And it's still available. Jumping into the news, we're going to kick it off with our new dinosaur. Our first new dinosaur came out a little bit ago, but remember we had no access to the non-open access stuff. So this is the first one, and it's a huge discovery. So it was written by Min Wang and others, including Jingmei O'Connor, who we talked to recently. And when we interviewed her, we talk a little bit about E and how we didn't know much about its wings because they were poorly preserved and we only had the one specimen. But now we have another one. It's not another E, but it's another Scansoriopterygid, which is really hard to say. It's the group that has weird, really long fingers, and we found them before we knew that any of them had this crazy extra wrist bone like E has. And a quick reminder, E is also known as Ichi. Really, the genus name is just E, but since the whole genus name being a single syllable is really weird for a dinosaur, because usually it's like something saurus or venator or like these longer names, then when it's just E, I always feel like I need to say Ichi, which is the genus and species. And E means wing and Chi means strange. So it translates as strange wing. I think it's one of the best dinosaur names ever.
And one of the shortest for sure.
Yeah, it is. It's one of the only genus names in all of the animal kingdom that's only 2 letters, which is a pretty cool claim to fame. So the new dinosaur is named Ambopteryx longibrachium, and Ambopteryx is Latin for both wings, and they wanted to use pteryx to reference the pterosaur-like membrane wings.
Oh yeah, this is the one where the headlines were all bat-like dinosaur found.
Yeah, I don't love the bat comparison, but I'll get to that more later. And then longibrachium is for its long forelimbs. So specifically, its forelimbs are about 1.3 times the length of its hind limbs. So in other words, it's getting more bird-like, right? You're getting those longer wings. You don't really need legs anymore, so there you go. One of the things that distinguishes it from Yi is the fact that it has those longer forelimbs potentially than its hind limbs too, because a lot of things that we found on Ambopteryx is different than what we found on E, so it's a little bit hard to make comparisons, but that's one where they do overlap, so we can see differences. A farmer found Ambopteryx in 2017 in the Liaoning province in northeastern China. Every time we do one of these Chinese discoveries, the difference in time between like discovery to publication is always like an order of magnitude faster than North America. I feel like it's like the US is one of the slowest. Canada seems to be pretty quick. And then China's just like cranking out papers like no tomorrow. It's pretty amazing. The find is significantly more complete than E, which is excellent because there were some big missing pieces for E. And they found most of an articulated skeleton. Really, it's just missing the right leg, most of its fingers, and then one styloform element, they call it. The styloform element is that crazy wrist bone that sticks out 90 degrees from the rest of the arm, and they think that there was a membrane covering it to make that really cool, unique wing on both E and Ambopteryx. Unfortunately, the skull is very poorly preserved, and I really mean very poorly because it's already pretty squashed to the point where they tried to do histology and they couldn't really do it because the bones weren't in good enough condition. But the skull, it almost looks like it's a decayed pressed flower or something. It's like it's smashed and then there's like huge pieces missing. It's like there's an outline that's fading away or something. So you can measure the overall height and length of this squashed thing, but you really can't see much of any detail to it. Fortunately, E did have a pretty good skull, so we can kind of piece them together that way. Just like E, Ambopteryx includes some membranous tissues around the styloform element, and it also has a lot of dino fuzz and gut contents.
Ooh, I like gut contents.
Yeah, so in some ways it's poorly preserved, but in other ways it's amazing. Both Ambopteryx and E are about 160 million years old, also known as the late Jurassic, and they're from similar areas, so we expect them to be pretty close relatives. And when they did the phylogeny, they did find that they were close relatives, so we can do some of the inferences where we're missing pieces of one and try to fill in gaps on the other. Like Sabrina said, a lot of people describe Ambopteryx as having bat-like wings, which is sort of true in that they have a membrane. We're used to the membrane on birds being covered with feathers, but really if you pluck all the feathers out of a bird, it's not that much different than what you see here. Basically everything that flies needs to have some kind of membrane, and then in birds they're covered in feathers. But bats have their fingers of their hand spread out, and then the membrane goes in between like the thumb and all the other fingers to make the wing. And it's just like a massive hand. If you imagine like extending your fingers out and then putting a membrane in between them, that's your whole wing. So
Almost
they don't,
like a webbed hand.
yeah, exactly. They don't really have much on their arm at all. It's like just a hand has gotten massive. And then pterosaurs, on the other hand, they have their fingers that are all kind of extended in the same direction. And then the membrane goes out from the end of its longest finger. One of its fingers is way longer than the others, and then connects back to its body. This Ambopteryx has that extra styloform element, which sticks out at a 90-degree angle from its fingers. And then we think the membrane goes around both the styloform element and the basically one row of really long fingers. So it's a little bit more like a pterosaur, in my opinion, than it is like a bat, because they have the same weird evolution of super long fingers rather than like spread out more evenly length fingers. But I think most people don't really know what a pterosaur wing is like. So for pop culture, it makes more sense to compare it to a bat. Plus, it doesn't have feathers, which makes a bat-like, but also pterosaur-like. Anyway, they believe it was an adult or a nearly an adult when it died based on the fact that it had a fused pygostyle, which is pretty cool because a lot of times we've been talking lately about how we find these dinosaurs and then we find out it's a juvenile and we're like, oh, we don't really know how big it got. It's kind of a shame. Mm-hmm. But this, is probably about full size. They estimate its full size is about 32 centimeters or 1 foot in body length. So decent size.
I was going to say that's pretty small.
Yeah, it's true. For a dinosaur, it's small. For a flying creature, it's not that small.
True.
They estimate that it weighed about 306 grams or about 2/3 of a pound, which is, bigger than your average bird you'd see around your house probably, but definitely not on the larger size of birds because birds get up into the tens of pounds. So not huge. It would be pretty big for a bat though, but we do have way bigger. Just Google the large flying fox.
Oh yeah.
Which is one of my all-time favorite animals. And I'm not going to say anything more about it other than Google it because I love bats so much that I will stay on this tangent for a long time.
It's right up there with dinosaurs.
Yeah, they're pretty great. As far as living animals go, I think bats are my favorite.
Not birds?
No, definitely not birds. Bats are cooler. So on to Ambopteryx's gut contents. They had both gastroliths, which are good for grinding up plants, but they also found bone fragments in there. It's a really strange combination. I can't remember ever seeing gastroliths and bone fragments before in a single gut contents. Doesn't mean it hasn't happened, but I don't remember it. That means that it was likely an omnivore, obviously, if it's eating things with bones as well as grinding up plants. And they said that other Scansoriopterigids have diverse teeth that might mean they were omnivores. But to me, looking at their teeth, a lot of the other ones look just like crazy sharp and like huge. But I guess it doesn't matter that much. I mean, if you're picking off leaves, I don't know. I'm thinking like Diplodocus, you don't need like a dental battery if you're going to just swallow it. So it seems like it'd be hard to tell when something has omnivorous like teeth. You really just need the things for catching the prey, more than anything. Then if you have a gizzard with a bunch of gastroliths, you could take care of whatever you don't chew in your mouth later. So anyway, its toes are long and flexible, so it probably could have perched pretty well. But unfortunately, its wings might not have been strong enough to sustain flight for long, which kind of led them down this path of, well, maybe it was a glider. And then Jingmei O'Connor said it might have been a, quote, creepy looking dinosaur squirrel, end quote, and then basically used its wings to fly in between branches. So that is kind of terrifying.
Good description.
Yeah. Based on some of its relative skull, they were definitely really creepy looking. IVPP made a really great video showing how it might have glided down from the trees. It basically glides off a branch onto a little fallen log. That's pretty cool to look at. And in it, you can see their recreation of the dino fuzz, which is a pretty neat part of it. We think pterosaurs might have had dino fuzz too. I guess not dino fuzz or ptero fuzz. Yeah. But in the fossil, you could only see fuzz kind of on the head and neck and upper arm is sort of where you see the fuzz sticking out. There's just a little spot with preserved sort of fuzz impression or feathers, you could call it, but they're pretty proto-feathery. They're not really big pennaceous feathers. And then in the recreation, they kind of matched that up. They had longer fuzz on its head and neck, although to my looking at it, it looked like the base of the neck and the upper arm in the fossil itself looks like it might have had really long filaments on it, which they didn't really put into the recreation, probably because it looks kind of weird and is strange to have really long filaments on like the leading edge of a wing, basically. But it's always hard to say exactly how these things come out during the preservation. Like the wings are kind of smashed around too, so they still can't really see exactly how the membrane would have covered the wing. That's what we're really hoping for, is one where it has the wing stretched out, like we actually had last week with that Archaeopteryx relative, but we didn't get that this time, unfortunately.
Doesn't mean next time we won't.
Yeah, it's true. It's only been a couple years since we found E, and we already have another really great specimen, so who's to say we won't get another one, fill in another piece. In their recreation, they also gave it 4 long tail feathers that stick out of the pygostyle, kind of evenly spaced, which I think makes it look pretty cute, as long as you don't look at his freaky face. I think that's probably based on his close relative, Epidexipteryx, because that one is preserved really nicely with this mini fan. I say mini because it only has 4 feathers, but it's like almost the length of the rest of its body. So they're like really narrow, long feathers. They're pretty cool. One thing I also thought was interesting in their recreation, they didn't show it folding its wings at all, either while it was perched or after it landed. My guess is just that they didn't want to animate that because they don't know how it would have worked, since we don't know how to deal with this crazy wrist bone sticking out at a 90-degree angle, and that's not what the paper was about. But if it did have to leave its wings out at all times, you could see how this is not the type of wing that won out in the evolutionary race, because it's just kind of stuck permanently with its arms sticking all the way out. It almost looks like it's flexing. It's got these huge wings, and its arms are so long, and it has to kind of hold them in front of it. Although the fossil itself kind of has its arms folded, the right arm in particularly looks reasonably lifelike, like it might have been folded while it was alive. But it's always possible that a skeleton was pushed into a position it wouldn't have adapted while it was alive, kind of like all of those death pose theropods we see, where like the head is curved almost all the way back to its hips. We know that T-Rex probably wasn't walking around like that, but we've found quite a few specimens that look like that. So it's always hard to piece together how these fossils match with their living positions. The authors disagree with a previous assertion that Scansoriopterigids use their longest finger to dig insects out of tight spaces, because they think it makes more sense that it's just kind of included in that pterosaur-like wing. Basically, it has 3 freaky, really long fingers. And if you didn't know it was part of a wing, you'd think like, oh yeah, it must be digging. There's got to be some reason it evolved these crazy long fingers. But once we found this membrane next to it that looks like it was part of a wing, it makes a lot more sense that that's what was happening. And some of the other Scansoriopterigids didn't include that last finger and that last wrist bone, which connects where that crazy styloform element juts out at like a 90 degree. So we don't really know. Maybe some of the earlier ones actually were like E and Ambopteryx and had these big membranous wings to go along with their crazy long fingers. And another thing worth Googling, by the way, is the eye lemur, which they mentioned in the paper, because it has this really freaky, extra skinny, gangly finger, kind of in the middle of its hand, actually. It's like in between two normal-ish fingers.
Oh, yeah, we saw a taxidermy of that recently.
Yeah, at the ROM, actually. And they know that that lemur uses that crazy finger for getting insects out of trees and stuff. So that's what they were thinking with these dinosaurs. But yeah, now it's like, man, it's probably a wing. But in the paper, they also mentioned that gliding isn't the only option for why it evolved these crazy long fingers and this membranous wing and this weird bone sticking out at a 90-degree angle, because they could have also been used as a display structure, or they could have used it in wing-assisted incline running, or maybe something else entirely. And by looking at those long proto-feathers up by the neck and at the leading edge of the wing, it definitely seems like that would have been good for a mating dance or some other sort of visual display. And we've got more new dinosaurs coming next week.
That's every week.
Yeah.
Stay tuned. In Highlands Ranch in Colorado, there were workers on a construction site that found some more dinosaur fossils, and the Denver Museum of Nature and Science said that it's a limb bone and several ribs from a ceratopsian. So paleontologists are now working to secure the site and then figure out the size of the bone bed. And I think it's in the same area they found a triceratops recently in the last few years. So it's a good place for bones, I guess.
Yeah, Colorado in general. Can hardly go wrong.
Right. Well, also in China, because there's 4 college students that found a clutch of dinosaur egg fossils while they were on the walk in the countryside. The Chinese Academy of Science confirmed that the eggs were from the Cretaceous, and they're now in a museum in Pingxiang City in Jiangxi province. In some museum news, in New Zealand, the Museum of New Zealand of Te Papa Tongarewa has a new iguanodon tooth on display. Well, it's not really new. It's actually I think the first iguanodon tooth found.
Nice.
Iguanodon's one of the original dinosaur fossils found. It was found back in 1822 near Cuckfield, Sussex by Gideon Mantell, or rather his wife, Mary Ann, depending on who you ask. I think more people realize now it was her. Mantell sent it to George Cuvier, who thought that it was a rhinoceros tooth, but then changed his mind pretty quickly after. So Mantell named the tooth Iguanodon, and Iguanodon was one of the 3 original genera included in Dinosauria.
Yeah, and the teeth are crazy important because it's called iguanodon because the tooth looks like an iguana tooth, except massive.
Yes. Except now we know they look nothing like iguanas.
Yeah, it's cool that in New Zealand they have one of those now.
The Milton J. Rubenstein Museum of Science and Technology in Syracuse, New York, also known as MOST, is getting a permanent 3,000 square foot dinosaur exhibit called Dino Zone. And it's their first permanent exhibit for dinosaurs. It's opening July 10th. They'll have 9 life-size dinosaurs, including a T-Rex. And one of the pictures, it looks like they might also have a triceratops. Then there will be a dinosaur dig area and a place for, they called it a dino dodgeball game. I don't know what that means, but it sounds exciting.
Play dodgeball with a dinosaur?
Or against dinosaurs?
Or in a dinosaur costume?
Ooh, that would be tricky.
Or maybe just in a room with a dinosaur painted on the wall? That's probably the most likely.
Well, anyone who visits the most can tell us. Washington, D.C. has a new dinosaur. It was originally built in Mexico for Burning Man for 2018. And this dinosaur's name is Ichiro. It's a velafrons, which is a lambeosaurian hadrosaur with a crest, and that name means sailed forehead. So it's got that sailed forehead. It lived in the Cretaceous in what is now Mexico. Makes sense, considering where it was made. Ichiro's about 30 feet long, very colorful. The artist who made Ichiro, Marianela Fuentes, said that the colors are inspired by designs of Mexico's ancient Huitol tribe, and Ichiro is, quote, an altar to ancient times. Yeah. So now Ichiro's on the roof of the Hotel Eaton, D.C. It sounds like after this summer, though, he's moving to somewhere in San Jose, California.
Nice.
Yeah.
Closer to home so we could see it.
This next one's really cool. This network and systems engineering student, Esme Kramer, built a dinosaur in her free time. Took her about a year to build, but she was also working and in school, so it's literally in her free time. She built it in her living room using PVC pipes. She said that they're cheap, light, and she could heat them to bend and fold around other pipes. So she built the frame around her. It's this movable raptor. You can move the head and neck and open and shut the mouth to make it look like it's roaring or chewing. She does that in her video. And she says it's not yet finished. She might add some foam around the body, but it looks really good in the video, really smooth.
Nice. I love a good dinosaur puppet.
Yeah, me too, actually. Yeah, that comes up later in our interview with Brian Eng.
Yep.
So thanks to Christopher who shared this one with us via Facebook. There's a site called Quirky Berkeley. It has a page dedicated to dinosaurs that you can find around Berkeley, California, and it's like a treasure hunt. You see different dinosaur sculptures. In the pictures, there's T-Rex, some sauropods, other animals, also some dinosaur figures that have been glued to fences. So it makes for a fun walk around the city if you can find them.
It made me think we really do need to get a dinosaur sculpture for our front yard, though, so we can get added to these lists. We're not in Berkeley, but still.
Added to a list.
Yeah.
Last, in Bozeman, Montana, Gallatin High School has just made a raptor their new mascot. I think it might be a new school because the article said that the school's being built now. It's 50% complete, and then the rest will be built by June 1st of next year. So then that makes sense that they're choosing a mascot. Apparently that whole thing was a long process, and not everybody wanted a raptor initially. There's one guy who liked mountaineers better, but now he's on board with the raptor, so that's good. And they need to make a logo, but they've got time left.
There's already a raptor mascot. They should have picked a weirder dinosaur. Why not the ankylosaurus, right?
Right. Well,
Nobody's the ankylosaurus.
or any of the famous Montana dinosaurs.
Yeah. Before we get into our interview with Brian Eng, we want to remind everybody that we give extended versions of our interviews to all of our patrons. And this one is very extended because once we got talking to Brian, I think we talked for about 3 hours total. We only recorded maybe half of that, but that's still an hour and a half. So this is obviously very pared down. But if you want to hear the full interview, the unabridged version, if you will, then definitely think about signing up for our Patreon at patreon.com/iknowdino, and you can get full access to this and all of the previous content too. When you become a patron, you get everything in history too. It's not just from that point going forward. So definitely think about it. And without further ado, here's our interview with Brian Eng.
We're here today with Brian Eng, who's a paleo artist. I think it might be more accurate, though, to call him an all-around creative because his work is in many publications. He's beautifully illustrated many newly named dinosaurs, including like Dynamoptera and Invictarx, to name a few. And he also makes puppets, movies, music, so much more. And he's probably one of the most energetic people, I think, that we've met.
Yes.
That's slightly terrifying because I know, some people in paleo are like exhausting. So shit, I must be really wearing people out myself.
It was more that when we met you, you had like produced a book of all your ongoing projects that weren't even finished yet because there were so many to go through that you were like, wait, I'm working on this and I'm working on this and I'm working on this. And it was like every major unnamed dinosaur for the next couple months.
So yeah, that's my new art book, which I just put out for my Patreon supporters. It's all of my work from the last 2 years and a few older pieces, like kind of mixed in that like I couldn't not include because they're like good portfolio pieces, and not everybody on Patreon has the. I released a smaller art book a few years back, so this is like the new updated art book for my Patreon supporters. But yeah, I had it at SVP, and I find that having a physical copy of your work it makes a good impression, and it's like so much of what we do nowadays is just in this like digital ether and flows through people's media feeds, and then it's like gone from reality. But to me, there's something really satisfying about making physical objects and putting them in somebody's hand and be like, here you go.
For sure. Yeah, we love paleo art. We bought a couple of your prints.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and you signed them too, which is great.
Yeah.
We wanted to buy one of your originals, but you're too popular. We couldn't afford your
Did I have originals at SVP?
You had at the auction, or not the auction.
Picturing the past.
Yeah, the exhibit at the museum. You had some stuff.
Oh.
I guess they probably weren't original because everything you do is digital. So I don't know how you define original when things are digital.
So at the Picturing the Past exhibit, those were like nice high quality canvas prints that were kind of expensive to produce. But I clearly marked them up too much because none of those sold.
Oh no.
I do have originals too because I work. So my process is kind of half traditional and half digital. So the thing with digital is that in order to get a lot of fine scale detailing in digital, it takes a long time, and it never, to me, to like my eyes at least, it never has that like gritty organic quality that like pencil or watercolor or paint on a page or a board or whatever does, because, there's this like micro detail in physical materials that goes way down. So what I do is I draw usually mostly in graphite, but I also use like some watercolor and some art marker and some acrylic here and there. And I'll usually work in like a grayscale or a limited color palette, because I'm not actually a very good traditional painter. It takes me a really long time to like finesse color layers with real paint, even though I'm practicing when I can at that, because I want to do more like full scale wall murals and stuff like that actually on walls. But for most of my illustrations, what I do is I work in grayscale in a traditional medium and then scan that at a really high resolution, and then color kind of behind that or on top of that in Photoshop. So basically most of my finished colored illustrations are a digital composite of a traditional piece that's then been colored and fixed up and finessed digitally.
Wow.
How big are these pieces of paper?
It depends on the final output of the piece. I mean, like a lot of little things, like if I just need to draw like one animal or like a little tiny scene, I'll do just like 8.5 by 11, all the way up to, for the mural projects I've done, I'll draw on large format paper. So usually it's like a meter wide spool of printer paper, and then I can pull that out as long as I need to. The most recent big mural I did was for a traveling exhibit called Savage Ancient Seas, which is all focused on the marine reptiles and pterosaurs and a few dinosaurs and marine birds from the Western Interior Seaway of Kansas. And I did a mural showing Dilophosaurus chomping a big fish called Xiphactinus in half. And there's a Hesperornis, which is a dinosaur, so I could talk about it on this podcast. There's a couple of Hesperornises diving in to like eat chunks of
those are awesome.
Xiphactinus and little fish swimming alongside the mosasaur. So it's supposed to be like a whole kind of ecology scene. And that mural is printed up. I think they printed it like, I didn't even tell me they were going to print it this big, but I think they printed it like 23 or 27 feet long or something like that for the exhibit. But the original is 8 feet long by 3 feet. So with like big mural prints, you can usually get away with 2 to 3 times doubling the size without much loss in quality. They then went like way above that and printed it even bigger. And then at SVP, they had like the big banner print at the Treebold Paleontology booth. And I was like noticing digital artifacts and stuff. And I'm like, oh no, I should have fixed that. And like weird little issues. Yeah. So any size of paper I can get into a scanner is what I work on.
How do you scan the giant roll that's 8 feet long?
So there are large format scanners that usually they scan the same size as that large format printer roll. So like they're like a lot of these banner printer scanner combo machines. Like pretty much every FedEx office has a large format scanner, and you basically you run big sheets of paper through it. It's limited by width, but above 8 feet long, most computers have a really hard time handling that scan at like 600 DPI. It makes a really huge TIFF file. And the people at these like print shops that I've used to scan these things are like, occasionally I could tell I'm stressing people out because their computer is like chunking along processing this file. And they're like, we've never scanned anything this big, this high resolution. I'm like, well, you got to do what you got to do. So that's part of the reason why I'm like trying to practice traditional painting techniques too, because above a certain size, like mural, you really just, your best bet is to just paint it directly on the wall, I think, rather than, people create these huge digital murals. But in my experience, when you're working small scale and then printing it up large scale, the experience of seeing it large scale is such a different physical experience, just in terms of like, how you move your head looking around the thing, and how the image looks in perspective when you're like standing underneath a thing that's 12 feet high. It has a very different effect than if you, for example, like have it on a 3 foot by 6 foot piece of paper, and you're even when I'm drawing large format, it's not the same as like when you finally see it on a big wall in front of you.
Right.
It's like definitely a different physical experience. And at least for me, there's decisions that I would make differently if I was working small scale versus working large scale, which is why I like with my recent mural projects, I like basically tried to work as large as I possibly could before going to the digital side. And then, hopefully some of the bigness works when it gets made even bigger.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I can totally imagine that.
Well, the one I'm thinking of is your piece that was at Western Science Center for the Mammoth exhibit.
Oh, did you guys get down there?
Yeah, we did.
Oh, awesome.
Because I saw
so great.
the digital version, it's like posted online somewhere, and then we went there, and yeah, that's a totally different experience.
Yeah, because it's like a mammoth on top of you, rather, or mastodon.
Exactly.
Oh yeah,
say.
Mastodon exhibit. Yeah, not mammoth. Sorry.
It's okay. I was going to get to that. Yes. So, I'm really glad you guys were able to get down there because, Hemet is not very close to any of the other major city centers in Southern California. So it's a bit out of the way to get to Hemet. And I didn't, even living in California my whole life, I didn't realize that they had a museum down there that has, like, I think the largest collection of mastodon material west of the Mississippi. That was the first mural I did. And I'm glad that I was able to visit the museum and like really see Max kind of like from the angle that you'd see the skeleton. And like one of the things I did kind of in preparation for that is I went down there and I taped together a whole bunch of pieces of painting, like masking paper. Like you can get these big rolls of cheap paper at the hardware store. Taped a whole bunch of them together to make the size, a sheet of paper the size that the mural would be. And then me and their guy, Victor, who's like their maintenance man guy, we like hung it on the wall there, and then I put a marker on a stick and started just like trying to kind of sketch out where I would want the head within the composition based on like the space in the museum. That was a really fun job, and it was a nice opportunity to collaborate with an awesome institution that a lot of people unfortunately don't know about. So I'm glad you guys are spreading the word.
Yeah, and I think a couple of the prints you made for them too, the Dynamo Terror and Invictarx are both for them, right?
Yeah, so Dynamo Terror and Invictarx they don't have much of either of them, unfortunately, but they really wanted to publish these because it points to there being this potentially really productive fossil locality down there. And what I got actually really excited about with that project was that they get beautiful wood and plant fossils from kind of a contiguous fossil bearing area, also in New Mexico, where they've got these beautiful plant fossils that show this kind of turnover in the ecology from non-flowering gymnosperm plants to these, new flowering plants kind of taking over the forest architecture. There's all these, early fig trees and lotuses and different aquatic plants and all these, like, you get this sense of this kind of tropical jungle or coastal swampland, kind of like what we have nowadays in the Mississippi River Delta or Louisiana, maybe somewhere between that and like Southeast Asia, like a weird hybrid ecology. So it was exciting to like get to do an early tyrannosaur chasing or about to attack a weird armored dinosaur in like a late Cretaceous jungle swamp world.
Yeah, it's awesome looking. I love that drug.
Oh yeah.
Thanks. Glad you guys like it.
Are they considered drawings at this point, or what do you call your finished product? I
guess an illustration. It's a hybrid of it's a pencil. So like that one is pencil drawing, and there's actually some, not watercolor. I used like art markers to do a lot of the plants because I realized that when I've done a lot of plants in pencil, but pencil has this like gritty edge, like hard edged feeling to it. It's great for doing like dry pieces of wood and like rock formations and dinosaur scales and stuff. But I was realizing that with plants, like they have this translucent softness to them because they're organisms that absorb light through all their tissues. So when you paint or illustrate a plant, it's actually best not to have really hard outlines on stuff. So I did all those plants on separate pieces of paper with art markers, and then I kind of like built this whole jungle out of compositing all these traditionally drawn plants together, and then doing little touches of digital painting on top of them here and there to kind of like blend the whole scene together. So I get illustration, digital. It's not just digital. Illustration, I think, is the best catch-all term.
Wow.
But it's a little bit of a collage too.
Yeah, I mean, it's digitally composited. So my process for creating these illustrations actually kind of comes out of my background in animation, I went to college for film and animation, and in animation school, we were using, traditionally hand-drawn animation and then compositing it digitally and doing backgrounds digitally and kind of like building these scenes. And that had some clear advantages to it over just strictly working digitally in terms of just the look and the feel and the expressiveness of the drawings, and also kind of the speed with which you can make a bunch of texture and detail with graphite, especially for me, because I've been drawing in graphite my whole life. There's like less of a learning curve there than with going to a purely digital workspace. Being able to kind of like build everything in layers and kind of control how detailed and how blurry and how light and dark the foreground and the middle ground and the background are. So yeah, that piece is definitely kind of like a digital traditional art collage illustration thing.
Yeah.
I feel really pretentious talking about my creative process. Like,
You don't
No,
sound pretentious.
you
It's
don't,
just
no.
really interesting.
And we know nothing
Ugh.
about this, so
Okay.
it's good to learn. I wanted to ask, so a lot of times with dinosaurs or paleontology in general, I guess, only a few bones are found. How do you come up with a whole scene based on just a handful of bones?
So in some cases, you get lucky and the scrappy handful of bones animal will be closely related to something that a lot more is known from. And I've been mostly lucky in my paleo art career, if that's the word for it, in that when people have handed me scrappy animals, they're usually like closely related to something that there's like a lot of nice specimens of. There's actually if you go, I have a YouTube channel called youtube.com/dinosaurs reanimated, or you can just search Brian Ing paleo art, and you can see videos I've created on the process of doing these different illustrations. I've also done like a few live events where I kind of walk the audience through the process of reconstructing these animals. The first dinosaur I was kind of professionally hired to reconstruct this way was a little early ceratopsian dinosaur called Aquilops americanus. And it's the earliest horned dinosaur known from North America. So everything like Styracosaurus and Triceratops and Centrosaurus, all these big famous horned dinosaurs with giant frills and huge horns coming out of their face, they all evolved from this little chicken-sized thing that we only have this one crushed little skull from about 112 million years ago, found in Montana. So at a time when there was no horned dinosaurs yet in North America, there's this little skull of an early ceratopsian. So that was a really cool story. But when all you have is the skull, and people are like, yeah, we want to hire you to reconstruct this whole animal. It's a little bit scary. But then when you start digging into the research, what you find is that, very often there are closely related things that you have more material of. And Aquilops is interesting because it has a bunch of Asian and a few European relatives. And especially the ones from Asia, there's like beautiful three-dimensionally preserved skeletons of closely related little horned dinosaurs like Liaoceratops and Auroraceratops and Archaeoceratops. They're all really closely related. And the cool thing about this, a lot of dinosaurs, but especially the ceratopsians, is their bodies are kind of evolving slowly and their heads are what are changing a lot. So Aquilops has this head that tells us it's a early, relative of the horned dinosaurs, but its head is definitely a little different than anything that's been found in Asia. Whereas the ones in Asia, we have their heads and their whole bodies, and we can see that the body really has changed from Archaeoceratops to Liaoceratops to Auroraceratops, but they all have like slightly weird variations on like the early ceratopsian head design. So, you reconstruct the rest of the animal hopefully from better represented relatives. Hopefully they're, enough about them. And in the case of like the early horned dinosaurs, we do know a lot about them. Like we have, multiple growth phases of a lot of these things. When I say we know a lot about them, we know a lot about them by like paleo standards. Our species knows so little about most animals. It's really sad, but that's an aside. And then, the environment scene that I did of Aquilops is all based on stuff that we know from the Cloverleaf Formation where its skull was found. There's beautiful plant fossils. There's beautiful early mammal fossils. It was actually, this little ceratopsian was found while Rich Cifelli and Scott Madsen and their crew were out in the Cloverleaf looking for early Cretaceous mammals. And Scott Madsen is this amazing preparator who actually found the skull. He's one of these guys in paleo who is just a beast in the field and an incredibly skilled preparator and has a deep, quiet understanding of Earth history and ecology and how life works. And he stumbled across this rock that had a couple teeth sticking out of it. And he was like, "Oh, that's cool." He thought it was going to be like a little drysaur or something like that, a little ornithischian. And then he on his own time prepped it out and was like, "Holy cow, this is a little early ceratopsian relative." So talking to these different people who are involved in studying these different strata, you can start to paint a more complete picture of what the ecology and the landscape looked like. And unfortunately, a lot of that data isn't even published stuff. It's like stuff you have to either see for yourself by getting out there into the field, or get into collections and see what has been collected from these different sites. And of course, like talk to the people who have been spending significant chunks of their life, in the trenches, digging these fossils up, walking across the landscape, thinking about the landscape. And so in the case of that critter, it was great because I was able to get in contact with these different people who had been out in the Cloverleaf Formation and could tell me about, like, okay, this is the kind of plants we see and animals that would have been there. So it's a fun. That's what I really love about doing paleo art, is really getting into that prehistoric world and trying to pull all the pieces together to flesh it out.
Yeah, it really shows the amount of effort you put into it, because when there's the difference between me trying to read through a journal article, which may say a little bit about, where it was found and what was around with it, or may just like completely glaze over that and say like, we found this leg and this is the measurement of this certain muscle attachment point. The difference between a paper that has like an image you've created with it and one that doesn't, it's like my understanding immediately snaps into focus when there's like a good drawing.
Yeah, the important thing is that when people see the thing, they enjoy looking at it and they get something out of it. Hopefully, in the case of paleo art, both like emotionally and kind of like a sense of wonder and interest. Maybe even it communicates some ideas about science or how life works on the planet or something like that.
Oh, definitely. So what about other mediums? That you're making puppets right now for the St. George Museum. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
So I got lucky because I was approached about doing some videos for exhibits at the St. George Dinosaur Discovery Site at Johnson Farm, which is a little museum built around a dinosaur track site in St. George, Utah. And so anybody traveling from Las Vegas to Salt Lake, or from Salt Lake to Las Vegas, or going from LA to Salt Lake, anybody going across Highway 15 through the corner of Utah there passes through St. George. And if you get off at the exit for In-N-Out, and you drive a little bit past In-N-Out, and then you go right, you're going to find this museum that's awesome. It's this amazing little museum that's built around a dinosaur track site that's from the early Jurassic period. It's a little bit older than the rocks that Dilophosaurus come from, and it is this just awesome track surface that preserves all these behaviors. Unfortunately, most people, when they walk through a dinosaur track site, they're not trained trackers or interpreters of animal behavior. So they see a couple footprints, they see some smushes and some smudges in the mud, and they go, okay, cool, dinosaur footprint. But they don't really understand, like, oh no, that's actually where a dinosaur was swimming and then came ashore, sat down, put its hands down in the mud, and then got up and walked along the shore for 20 more paces before its tracks disappear. So there's like these little vignettes, these little stories and scenes all around this museum. So what I'm working on with them is creating videos that will be planted around the museum. And as you go around the track site, you can push a button and a little video will play on a screen, and it'll show a Dilophosaurid dinosaur or a Coelophysoid dinosaur going through the behaviors that left certain fossils in certain places around the track surface and around the museum. And then right now I'm editing like a intro video for the museum. So when you come into the museum, they show you a video, and the video they have right now, they really aren't happy with. So I'm doing a new one that's going to involve all kinds of dinosaurs. And in part because of the limitations of computer animation or animation in general, and in part because I really like doing practical effects, I'm building puppets to recreate some of these behaviors. So right now I just finished building a foot puppet, which I've only posted a couple still frames on Twitter and on my Facebook page, but if people support me on patreon.com/historian himself, they could see the whole process of creating this working foot puppet that's basically a Dilophosaurus foot built to scale that works as a hand puppet so that I can create footprints and show people how these different footprints were formed around this track surface. And then the next stage is I'm building a Dilophosaurus head and neck that is it's quite a ways along. I'm just getting to the point now where I'm sculpting the external skin covering for it, which will be cast in latex. And then I'll also be building some small coelophysoid dinosaurs, fish, basically doing a whole little practical effects movie showing these early Jurassic dinosaurs swimming, fishing, walking on the shoreline, hunting, eating, being dinosaurs in this place where we have direct evidence of the kinds of things that these dinosaurs did.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love, too, that you're doing that transition between swimming and walking, because I think about that all the time. And the first time I heard about it was a stegosaur somewhere in the UK, where they found it was like walking down a slope and you could see it slowly start to like lose contact with the slope, and the feet start to stretch out and become more like scrape marks. And I was just like, wait a second. We can confirm that a dinosaur could swim by footprints? What? That's nuts. That's so cool.
It really is. So Andrew Milner, who's the curator of paleontology at the St. George Museum, him and his core of volunteers have identified and discovered a whole bunch of different track sites around the St. George area that show all kinds of interesting behaviors. And they have tracks of pretty much every major dinosaur clade living at that time, and in one place or another they have them all swimming.
Oh wow.
So if you thought Stegosaurus in the UK swimming was cool, well, we now have theropods. There's a prosauropod site. There's a early ornithischians that appear to be going in the water and swimming. So they've got kind of everything.
Wow.
They're dinosaurs. They were incredibly diverse. One of the really cool things at the St. George Dinosaur Discovery Site is they also have direct evidence of theropod dinosaurs fishing in the early Jurassic. So this is so Spinosaurus, and this is all published too. And I don't know why more people don't know about this, but it's fine with me because I'm getting to do all the illustrations of these things. Spinosaurus is from the late Cretaceous, and there's some decent evidence that Spinosauruses were probably eating fish. At the St. George Dinosaur Discovery Site, you can see where coelophysoid theropods of varying sizes, from small little coelophysis or Megapnosaurus-sized things all the way up to Dilophosaurus-sized things, were getting in the water, swimming around, and then they have fish fossils showing that there were large fish living in this lake they call Lake Dixie. The fish have, a lot of them are semianodids, which is the group that includes gar, and semianodids have these enamelized scales. So they have tough, kind of like armor scales. The semianodids that were living at that time weren't gar. A lot of them were these weird things that Lophianotoids, which they were plant-eating things related to modern gar. Super weird fish. They also have big coelacanths, big lungfish, all living in this lake. And what they found, in addition to swimming dinosaur tracks, they found shed teeth from theropod dinosaurs that have the serrations worn off them. So, and it's not worn off by like erosion. It's worn off because they've been biting through tough stuff. So the only really logical theory is that these things are biting through these armored fish as they're getting in the water and actively, swimming and eating fish, which I just think is super cool to think that there's these enigmatic theropods, probably closely related to Dilophosaurus, maybe even some new species of Dilophosaurus proper. It's kind of hard to say at this point, but there's these whole groups of dinosaurs that we only have tracks of, but we know they were doing things that we wouldn't be able to tell from the bones. And we know that they were living a lifestyle that's totally different than what we assume for so many other theropods down the line. We know there were fishing theropods in the earliest Jurassic, like 200 million years ago.
Is there anything else that you want to share about your work?
Oh boy. Yeah, the other big thing is I'm going to be building a life-size pterosaur. Now, I know this is the I Know Dino podcast, and pterosaurs aren't dinosaurs, but I got a dinosaur tie-in for you, which I'm really excited about. It's going to be building it for the National Aviary in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So there's this huge aviary that you can visit in Pittsburgh, which is full of living dinosaurs in the form of all these bizarre modern birds. And they're putting together an exhibit that's called Living Dinosaurs. And it'll be all about how modern birds are related to dinosaurs and the things in their skeletons and the things in the fossil record and the things in their, behavior and everything that kind of clearly show us that they are related to these ancient groups. There is also going to be at least a little bit of information on pterosaurs too, in that they are, they share a deep, deep common ancestor with both dinosaurs and birds as dinosaurs. And also there's like convergence in a lot of ways between pterosaurs and bats and birds. They've all adapted to flight. And there are some really interesting adaptations associated with that, convergent evolution of flight. So I'm building a life-size Tapehara pterosaur that will be hanging from the ceiling of their aviary dome. Wow. So I'm really excited about that because I feel like in most other contexts, I have to show people pictures of birds or video of birds to be like, see, derived archosauromorphs are extremely weird and colorful and have waddles and crests and floppy bags and whatever, giant tail plumes and all this stuff. I have to justify the creative choices I'm making that are rooted in the reality of weird biology. But in this case, I'm super stoked because my weird pterosaur model will be hanging from a ceiling surrounded by real life, bizarre, weird dinosaurs. So I'm pretty stoked about that.
Nice. So if our listeners wanted to find out more about you and your work, where's the best place for them to go?
So the epicenter of everything I do creatively is my website, don'tmesswithdinosaurs.com. And then I have a YouTube page for paleo art, which is youtube.com/dinosaurs reanimated. You can also just search Brianing Paleo Art. I'm on Twitter at Gray Griffin. And then if you are really hardcore into the weird stuff that I'm making and you want to help me be financially stable, which ultimately means I'll just make more art all the time and better and faster, you could support my art on Patreon. So I'm at patreon.com/historian himself. And then I also have another YouTube page that's all my weird music videos and other art. That's youtube.com/historian himself. So those are all the URLs.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. You guys have been fun to talk to.
Thanks so much, Brian, for chatting with us. We had a really great time, and so great of a time we actually became a patron on his Patreon. So.
Yeah, you should check that out too. You can follow his current work where he is in California right now as this airs.
Yes.
Hopefully we'll get a chance to meet up with Brian sometime soon.
And now for our dinosaur of the day, Tongarewa, which was a request from Dinosaur 4602, so thanks. It was an ankylosaurid that lived in the late Cretaceous in what is now Mongolia in the Bayan Shira Formation. It was quadrupedal and herbivorous. It had a beak-like snout and probably snipped off its vegetation. Tongarewa is estimated to be between 13 to 20 feet or 4 to 6 meters long and weigh about 2 tons. It had armor on its body and a club tail. And it's been described as having 5 fingers and 4 toes, but an articulated foot wasn't found, and according to Victoria Arbor, it may have only had 3 toes, like other ankylosaurids. Tongarewa is also described as having pleated spines on the armored plates and osteoderms with furrowed ornamentation, lines or grooves, but these were half rings that protected the neck, turns out. However, Tongarewa had a long, narrow skull and a relatively small tail club, ribbed armor plates, and wide bones relative to its length behind the skull. It's one of the oldest known ankylosaurians from Asia. It was found in 1948 in a joint Soviet-Mongolian paleontological expedition. The holotype includes a fragmentary skull, some vertebrae, some ribs, humerus, radius, ulna, femur, tibia, fibula, and more, including some armor and scutes.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. 6 individuals were found in the site. Another specimen was found in 1975 that had the top of a skull and a fragmentary skeleton. More specimens have been found since 2006. At least a dozen specimens have been found in total. Tongarewa was described in 1952 by Evgeny Maleev. The type species is Tongarewa plicatospinius. And the genus name means wicker tail or basket tail. And it refers to the club tail that looks like a wicker basket. It's these interlaced bony structures that looks like a wicker basket weave. The species name means folded thorny and refers to the corrugated, which are these alternate ridges and grooves, spines on the armor plates. Mary Anscott renamed Cyromosaurus Disparoceratus as a second species, Talarurus disparoceratus, in 1977, but then in 1987 it was renamed as Malevus disparoceratus. Talarurus is part of Ankylosaurinae. It probably lived in lowland floodplains. Other dinosaurs that lived in the same time and place include dromaeosaurids, therizinosaurs, and other ankylosaurs. There's a skeletal mound of Talarurus at the Moscow Paleontological Institute based on the 6 individuals and a skull modeled after Pinacosaurus, but apparently that's not too accurate.
And our fun fact of the day fits perfectly into this. It's almost like we planned it. And that's that ankylosaurs are usually found alone, but there is some evidence that they may have lived in groups. So just like this find where we found 6 individuals together, there was a recent paper which has a title that starts The Dirty Dozen, referring to a dozen ankylosaurs that were found together. And that was written by Attila Ossi and others. And in it, they describe this area of 600 square meters, which is pretty big. It's about the size of the plot of land that our house is on. It's like a normal California plot of land, I would say, if that gives you any sort of ballpark of size. And of these 12, it included 6 Hungarosaurus, 2 Struthiosaurus, and then 4 that couldn't be assigned to any specific genus, but are something within Nodosauridae, and both Hungarosaurus and Struthiosaurus are nodosaurs as well. And the cool thing about this find, too, is that they're pretty sure they all died at the same time, so we're not talking about a trap or something where, it just happened that these dinosaurs were being preserved in the same place over time. We think they were all together when they died together, so it seems to show that they got together at least once in a while. So maybe they lived together. It would kind of make sense for defense, as herbivores tend to herd and things like that. So there we go. It might change the way you think about ankylosaurs a little bit if you think of them as herding animals.
And that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our new episodes. You can also join our community on Patreon, patreon.com/iknowdino, and buy some cool merch on our TeePublic store, bit.ly/iknowdino store.